Hello, everyone, and welcome to Joshi's Journey into 40K episode 6. Yeah, we're on episode 6 already. Thank you for tuning in to yet another episode of just me documenting everything I've been doing in the 40K universe over the past couple of weeks, almost 2 months at this point. For anybody who's watching and is used to seeing all the other videos, this one is going to be a little bit different and a little bit shorter for a couple of reasons. The first one, I've had on and off vertigo basically all day today, and I mostly just kind of want to lie down, so I don't want to take too much time recording all of them. Secondly, my social battery is on fumes. I've been doing things every day for the past 6 or 7 days at this point, and I just don't have a whole lot of energy left over. It honestly might have something to do with the vertigo. The third thing is I forgot to take photos, so I don't have a whole lot to actually show. It's mostly just going to be me talking on screen today. But I do want to thank, I didn't get your name, but at the most recent Odyssey RTT, somebody said that they were really looking forward to the next video, and so that's giving me the energy necessary to make sure we can power through and get this out for you guys, even if it is a day later than I was expecting it to be. One of the ways we are going to be saving time today is we are not going to be going into the list nearly as in depth because let's be honest, it's the same shit we've been bringing to every event so far. We have the Lord Solar Cadian Command Squad, Tank Commander with Gatekeeper, a bunch of guys, a bunch of tanks. We did put the Rogel Dorn back in after taking it out for There's Only War GT. And in order to make room for it, we dropped one squad of Cadians and a couple of the Sentinels that we were bringing and added some mortars back in as well because we were expecting a number of Tau players, a number of Eldar players. Ultimately, they didn't end up playing at the event, but very similar list to what we were seeing. Of course, we're doing Born Soldiers as well. But let's go ahead and talk about the event a little bit and the lay of the land. Of course, this was at the Odyssey RTT this past weekend. And firstly, I remember saying in previous videos that we were expecting this to be a grand tournament, a 2-day event, but there were not particularly high signups for the event, and a lot of people were attributing this to the fact that it was coinciding with Mother's Day. And of course, that means that a lot of people did end up having plans on Sunday and were not going to be able to attend. And so, the announcement was made earlier in the week that it was going to be downgraded from a GT to an RTT. At this event, we were not looking at the same number of players that we're oftentimes used to seeing at Odyssey RTTs, which usually are somewhere in the 30 to 40 range. This one only had 12 players at it, which was kind of nice because it meant that we had a lot of space to put all of our things. Also, the terrain was largely similar to what we were used to seeing, but there were a couple of tables that we were on that had some more unusual terrain. A lot of things that's like, ooh, I don't know exactly how that wants to be. We have like, I had one table where I had two giant pieces of terrain that were obscuring, and I had another table where I had three small obscuring pieces that were only about yay big. I would say like maybe 4 or 5 inches wide, and basically squares. So it was a definitely a very different style of terrain than what we were used to, partly because we didn't have nearly the same number of people coming out for the event. In terms of the strength of the event, at this one, we did end up having a total of 12 players. Nobody who actually showed up to the event was there for their first event, so everybody had some experience. So we had 3 players in the top 500, no players above that, and then we had 2 players also in the top 1,000. So 5 of the 12 players that ended up showing up were ranked in the top 1,000, which was a fairly, I mean, for an RTT, was a fairly strong event overall. But as one of the higher ranked players going into the event, I was expecting to do rather well. But as we'll get into it, you'll see that not everything goes as planned at this one. So let's go ahead and get into our first game. Our first game that we played this time around was going up against Tomas and his Iron Hands. And Tomas, firstly, great guy, would absolutely love to play against him again. But he was also bringing a very unusual list. He brought 3 drop pods with 3 units of Devastators, of Multi-Meltas, and 3 units of Stern Guards mixed in between. So each drop pod would have 1 squad of each inside. And they would just drop out, and they had so many Meltaguns, you guys. Like, Meltas, multi-Meltas, it was really, really kind of oppressive because you just knew that if they were going to get within that 24-inch range, any vehicles they had on the field were just going to die. He also had 2 units of infiltrators, which basically just sat back. One sat in the middle for Oaths and Moments points, and one would hold one of his back objectives. And then he also brought 3 of the big laser tanks that you oftentimes see in Iron Hand's list. I can't remember the exact name of them right now, but he did end up bringing 3 of them. And they were really cool. He had a fantastic green paint scheme. We were playing this one on Recover the Relics, which is normally one of the best missions for guard, but the terrain here was a little bit wonky, right? We had a couple of spots where I couldn't necessarily create enough space to actually hide everything, and also going up against Tomas's unique list, I wasn't exactly sure how to deploy all of my terrain properly in order to give myself an advantage. Of course, Tomas did win the roll off for defender, so he put uh, one little bit of obscuring terrain right in the middle, and then would later plop his infiltrators right there as well. And it was really hard for me to actually get them off of the objective. Oh yeah, the thing that we had that was really odd for terrain was we had a obscuring terrain piece that was probably like maybe 6 inches across, but it was like a foot tall. Like, and both of us had one of them, and we're just kind of like, I don't know what to do with this exactly. We ended up putting it both in our deployment zones. Like, well, I guess we're gonna use it to try and hide things behind, but because it's like it's not actually that large, like it didn't have a huge footprint, it wasn't the easiest thing to actually hide units behind. But anyway, Cover the Relics is a 6 objective mission, control 1, control 2, control more, and this is normally a really good one for the guard because we do have we're really good at just controlling 1, controlling 2, and because we don't really have to go too far out of our deployment zone, it ends up being relatively easy for us to do really well on primer. And then because we have such long firing lanes generally on this map, because it is short edge deployment, we oftentimes do very well just in terms of the number of tanks that we bring that are a huge problem for a bunch of other players as well. And then once we actually started getting into the game, Tomas also won the go first role. And because he has a bunch of drop pods that can come in on turn 1, while I did have a couple of sentinels strung out across the mid board in order to try and deny opportunities for the drop pods to come in and do the maximum damage, because he had so much anti-tank firepower, he had the laser destroyers, he had a ton of Meltas that were going to be coming in, I effectively had to pick up almost all of my Leman Russes off of the board in order to make sure that they were not going to go down on turn 1. And the only vehicle, or the only heavy vehicle that I actually had on the table was my Rogel Dorn. And Tomas ends up dropping 2 drop pods in the middle of the field, and ultimately, like, he does a lot of pressure with his shooting, but he doesn't do enough damage that I'm out of the game on turn 1. What ends up happening is on my turn 1, I jump some Khazarkan forward, but ultimately, I roll really poorly on this. I was expecting that this squad with double Melta, double Plasma would be able to pick up a Devastator unit and a Stern Guard unit, but I think we killed 3 Devastators and like 2 Stern Guard, right? Like, ultimately, we did almost no damage to the targets that I was really relying on actually being able to kill. And so suddenly, Tomas's left flank, or my left flank, is really overbearing based on the number of units that we are seeing coming out from Tomas's side of the board. And then on his second turn, Tomas gets a little bit of pressure. He brings his laser tanks a little bit further forward, but I know that my turn 2 needs to be really big in order to try and bring myself back into position where I am in the game. And I should be in a position to do so. I still have 3 Leman Russes coming in from reserve, and I haven't used my Barbican's Key yet. And so on my second turn, I think I'm suddenly in a really good position because I take my Barbican's Key, um, Khazarkan, and teleport them towards the backside of Tomas's side of the map, and they blow up one of the tanks that Tomas was bringing from 100 to 0. Just straight up killed it. But because Space Marines have sticky objectives, it ended up not being the most important thing in the world because the objective that the laser tank was currently sitting on was still under his control. He had already put up a banner, and so with that in mind, he started taking up a lot of points off of that regardless. And like, Khazarkan did not live to actually take that objective back. The other thing is, as my tanks come through, they clear out the entire right flank, right? There is a drop pod, some Devastators, some Stern Guard. All of those units are wiped off the board on my second turn. But the thing that I hadn't necessarily really thought about was what Tomas could do on his third turn. And that's when, on his third turn, he dropped his last drop pod with more Devastators, more Stern Guard. And as they come out, they roll really well. They take out 2 Leman Russes instantly. At this point, my Rogel Thorn has already been taken off the table, even while hiding behind the dense cover. And the thing that broke the game, the thing that made the game difficult to nearly unwinnable, was immediately after that, Tomas goes for his Devastators and his Stern Guard to try and take my southeastern objective and charges both of them. And they both get in on a 9-inch charge, and suddenly I can no longer hold control of that. Suddenly, his Devastators and his Stern Guard are no longer just sitting out in the open for what's left of my battle line to actually pick them off. And he takes away one of my objectives. He's been contesting my southwest objective the entire time, and from there, I just don't really have a whole lot left. After a bunch of shooting, I end up leaving one Stern Guard alive on the point. That also allows the remaining Devastators to jump off of that point and come contest my home objective on Recover the Relics, and that almost never happens. So Tomas ends up finding himself in a really strong position. I don't have enough tanks left over, and as he was kind of describing how his list ends up working, it's really oppressive against especially vehicle heavy lists, and he does a really good job at actually making sure that my vehicles don't have really clean lanes of fire because it's just the raw output of this Iron Hands list that he did end up bringing. So at the end of it, Tomas did end up taking the game 60, or he ended up winning 97 to my 64. And so that's the first game. I know that both of us came into it. We talked about it a little bit afterwards. I said that seeing Iron Hands is really worrying as a guard player, just because they are one of the few armies that can actually outshoot us and can control firing lanes as well or better than the guard can. And he was saying a very similar things like, "Ooh, this is one of those armies where like most of my stuff, I'm going to drop pot it, and then they're going to be left in the open. And so if I don't make some of my charges, suddenly all my Devastators, all my Stern Guard, all of the things that I use to actually take objectives and hold them are not going to be able to do that." But it ends up being, Tomas ends up going first. He makes a couple of fantastic charges. He did a really good job controlling a lot of firing lanes, making it uncomfortable for my tanks to actually shoot. He does end up taking his first game. As we move on to our second game, I end up playing up against Kyle and his Chaos Knights. And Kyle is the first player that I have actually played up against in multiple events. You might remember in a previous event from the Gameology RTT that we played a couple of weeks ago, I played up against his Cogs of Vashtor army. And today, as soon as he saw that we drew this pairing, he was like, "Ah, perfect. It's time for my revenge." Kyle brought 13 War Dogs with most of the normal things I'm used to seeing. He had a couple with autocannons, he had a couple with the meltas and the swords, he had a couple with the swords and the claws. He had one with like the Helm of Warp Sight, and he had another one that was like giving +1 to wound. All the things I'm normally used to seeing come through from a Chaos Knights army. This one that we ended up playing was going to be on Secure Missing Artifacts. And Secure Missing Artifacts is another one that the Guard tends to do fairly well on, because it's a 5 mission board, Control 1, Control 2, and it's a diet or a corner deployment. So it's not usually the hardest thing in the world for us to take it. If the Guard can take a quarter or a diagonal deployment and turn it into a short board edge deployment, it's almost always going to go well for us. The other thing about Secure Missing Artifacts is because there are extra points for controlling your special objective, 3 extra points, we don't actually need to score a whole lot in terms of what we actually need to. Like, we never actually need to get a 12 on primary to max out our primary, because if we get our 32 points for going 8, 8, 8, 8, and then we get our 15 points for controlling our precious artifacts, that's going to give us 47 and caps at 45. So this tends to be a fairly good one for us as well. The other thing is one of my previous training partners taught me a couple cool tricks when you're actually deploying your terrain to make sure that you get your terrain in such a way that when they move 6 inches, you guarantee that you will still have part of the objective poking out in such a way that you can hide behind obscuring. And that actually has helped a lot in the times that I have played on this map. But this is the table that has a lot of small, weird, obscuring pieces that were all basically like magic boxes, which I ended up putting some mortars in, but there was ultimately not a whole lot of room to hide on this one either. And so when we look at this game, my experience against Chaos Knights and the way that Kyle would describe his own army was he wants to take a bunch of control early, deny a bunch of primary on turns 2 and 3, and hopefully have done enough damage at that point to prevent um, his opponent from actually coming back because they know that Ruthless Tyranny is a pretty easy 15. Storm of Darkness is, I mean, not a consistent secondary, and especially against strong shooting armies, you can usually keep Chaos Knights to either a 4 or an 8 on that one, and then grind them down. Oftentimes, I've seen players take it because you can get the extra command points every time uh, your Armigers or your War Dogs kill something. Is something where it's kind of a crapshoot as to how well this is going to be shooting, right? You're usually looking at somewhere between 6 and 12 on grind them down. But as we end up deploying for this one, Kyle does end up going first, and to his credit, it does mean that I have to pull off most of my tanks. I believe the only Lehman Russ that I had left on the board, I think Kyle did end up killing it. But ultimately, so much of this game comes down to the fact that, yeah, I did have one that I I had neglected to measure with like the laser pointer to make sure that it was invisible, and he ended up getting two super Meltaguns and two of the autocannon. War Dogs were able to just pour fire into one Lehman Raz because just a little bit of the tip of its barrel was hanging out. So that was, I don't want to say a learning moment so much as I was just a little bit sloppy with it, but still it made a pretty big difference in the game. But the big turning point, or there are two big turning points in this game. First one was, I believe it was on turn 2, where he had one of his War Dogs declare charge against my Rogel Thorn. I'm like, hold on, I'm going to overwatch it. And it's worth noting that on the Rogel Thorn, because I have been convinced to take multi-meltas on all of my tanks as sponsons. So the Rogel Thorn has the main gun, so strength 10, AP3, damage 4, D6 plus 3 shots, coaxial autocannon, strength 7, AP1, damage 2, 2 shots, uh, two heavy, or just the one heavy stubber, so 3 shots, strength 4, AP0, damage 1, um, two heavy bolters, no heavy bolters, the belly gun, the pulverizer cannon, D6 shots, strength 8, AP2, damage 3, and then the multi meltas, 2 shots each, strength 8, AP4, damage D6. And so, remember when you're overwatching, it's only hitting on 6, unmodified 6s. And so, as I start rolling for this overwatch, I roll I roll crazy, you guys. And because you're born soldiers, your 6s to hit auto wound as well, so I don't even need to roll them. I just need to get the 6. It's like, okay, you have to make a save. The oppressor cannon ends up getting 2 shots through for like 8 damage. And then the multi meltas, almost everything else does like, I might get like a shot through and force Kyle to take an invul, but the multi meltas get their shots through, and I actually get 2 of them to do damage after the save. And I think I roll a 5 and a 3, so that's 8. And because the War Dogs only have like, I think it was 12 wounds, maybe maybe at the 14 wounds. I don't remember exactly what house he was playing, but regardless, like between the oppressor cannon and the multi meltas hitting as much as they did, Kyle's charge with his War Dog end up getting the War Dog killed, and that was huge. Suddenly, my Rogel Dorn is no longer tied up in combat. It's able to just shoot out completely free, and I effectively got an extra, like a really good turn with the Rogel Dorn to just pick up an extra War Dog. But with that said, Kyle was still in a pretty good spot overall, except on turn 3, I had a Lehman Russ, my Lehman Russ tank commander with Gatekeeper, ended up finding themselves in a spot where they were sitting, where they were under fire by a lot of the War Dogs on the other side. And he shoots it with, I think it was just a stubber, for the first part of it. No, it was something that was AP2 damage 1. It might have been like the lightning gun or something, like some special weapon that has double exploding 6s to hit. Um, anyway, as he goes through, because all of my tanks have armored tracks for only 5 points, it's super super good. It means that I get +1s to my saves, and I I I roll, and the tank would have been left on, or would have exactly died, but I CP reroll one of them, and it is living on a single wound on turn 3, on the top of turn 3. And I remember Kyle even asked, "Is like, are you sure you want to CP reroll with that? I have a lot of other things to shoot at it." And I remember my response at the time was, "Yeah, but I think I want to make you shoot more things at it." And so turn 3, he takes like his auto cannons and he shoots them at certain targets. And he takes his like thermal spears or whatever the super melters are called for the war dogs and puts them at other targets. But he only is throwing like stubbers at the tank commander because it's like, surely if I just drown it in enough shots, it will die, right? It only has a single wound left, even though the tank commander is only failing its save on um, 2, 3, sometimes a 4, depending on what he's actually shooting at it. Surely it's going to die. And on turn 3, it doesn't. It lives on 1 wound. And because the guard have access to our stratagem called Relentless for 1 CP, we can take it. I can take that 1 wound Lehman Russ and make it act at top bracket, which is pretty good. Really, really good. So the tank shoots and ends up picking up a War Dog. On his turn 4, Kyle ends up doing a very similar thing where he takes his like auto cannons, he takes his stubbers and things, and he puts them all at the tank commander. And he cannot wound it to save his life, right? Because the stubbers are, I think they're wounding on 5s or 6s. The auto cannons are wounding on 5s. He spends so many shots trying to take down the tank commander, and nothing goes through. The few shots that he are getting through, I'm saving them and so forth. After turn 4, yet again, um, the war dog is alive, and he has one more shot that he's trying to get through, and he has a war dog that he's like, okay, I need to make this charge, and it'll be in range to spend the CP in order to force it to take a morale check. And because tank commanders only have a leadership of like 8 on 2d6, it only needs to do 1 mortal wound. It's going to be on leadership 7 because he's got the -1 aura with the dread test. And surely that will be enough to actually kill the tank commander. But he goes for the charge, and if I remember correctly, he fails. I think he fails the charge. No, he doesn't fail that charge. He fails a different charge. He's like, I need this charge to go off. It means I'm not going to have the single command point left in order to make the tank commander take that morale test. He does get the charge to go off on the other side, but still, that's the CP that means that the tank commander is yet again living on 1 wound. And so, turn 3, my turn 3, it gets to shoot, picks up a war dog. My turn 4, I spend the CP in order to make it act at top bracket again, picks up another war dog. And as my only tank remaining on the field, it's my main source of firepower. It gets so much extra work done because it is alive and is effectively acting at top bracket over and over. And in his turn 5, it lives again. And I mean, it was definitely one of those spots where the fact that I got that CP reroll off, it was the most valuable reroll I've had in any game 40k I've played so far, because that one CP reroll ended up getting the tank commander to live from top of turn 3 to the, I think it was the end. It might have been the end of the game, right? It got to live the entire rest of the game, and it ended up picking up so much extra damage throughout the course of the entire thing. And let me double check. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I think it lives the entire game on a single wound, and because of that, I mean, killing a couple of extra war dogs when it probably shouldn't have absolutely changed the course of the game, and it ended up being a win for the guard, 89 to 84. As Kyle got really close, he ended up maxing out Ruthless Tyranny relatively early on, but largely because I did have the tank commander alive, I was able to deny multiple opportunities for second times for Storm of Darkness, the one we have to do an action on an objective. And I had a lot of fun that game, but mostly just because, like, I'm gonna use a poker term here. I was just sucking out on him every single time. It's like, well, I just need to I need to get this roll. I need to get this roll. And there was a couple of times where he would shoot at tanks in particular with like his Meltaguns, and I hit I think it was 3 6-up saves in a row. And I mean, I the Emperor was with me for this game, and he was saving me over and over again. And it was definitely a game where I feel as though Kyle probably, based on like how the rest of the game was playing out, if I hadn't rolled as well as I did and he hadn't rolled as poorly as he did, Kyle probably would have won it. Ultimately, we take those, right? It was a game where it felt like Kyle's dice and my dice had really determined a lot because with a score difference of only 5, I've oftentimes said that a score difference of about 5 to 10 is maybe one decision, but can also realistically just be like one or two dice rolls going a different way than they're supposed to. And this was definitely a game where multiple dice rolls were going in ways that they probably were not supposed to. But that puts us at 1-1 on the day, and that leaves us for our last game where we end up in a spot where, if you remember from our previous video, if we wanted to make top 100, we would need to go 2-1 at this event and have a good score to improve some of the other scores that we have had at previous events. And considering my current worst event as the time of recording, not including Odyssey, I had a score of 90 points. I would need to get, if I remember correctly, I needed to improve it by like, I want to say like 100 points altogether between the course of 2 games, or between the course of 2 events, and I needed to do really well at this event. Because I did okay in my first game, and because I had a high score in my second game, if I won my third game, I was going to be a spot where I could still potentially play to make top 100. And so the final boss for this day was going up against one of my best friends, Steve, and his Imperial Knights. And I will preface this by saying Steve and I have played a number of games before. According to my app and our memory, we have played 4 full games prior to this, and I had won every single one of them. So he says at the very beginning, it's like, Josh, wouldn't it be funny if the one time that I beat you is in a tournament bracket? I'm like, yeah, that'd be pretty funny. But we also have to remember the mission that we did roll for this one was Tides of Conviction. And this is one of the ones that, in my experience, has been more of a person who goes first wins the game more than any other mission that I've seen so far. Because both players are set up in really long strips around the long board edges. It's a control 3, or a control 2, control 3, control more. And the tertiary is you get 2 points for each, or you get 2 points if you control an objective on the opponent's side of the board at the end of your turn. And additionally, if you control objectives on your opponent's side of the board, you get an additional 3 points per objective that you control at the end. And Steve brought his Imperial Knights. He ends up playing with two Titanic Knights and 7 Armoured. I keep screwing up at this point between Armiger and War Dog because they're the same shit, you know? Anyway, he ends up playing like that, and we set up a bunch of terrain. And I'm going to start this by saying I had a conversation with another player after the event. I believe his name was Liam. And he was saying that, yeah, on Tides of Conviction especially, you have to deploy your terrain. You have to deploy all of your army, assuming you're going to go second. Because if you don't, there's not really a chance for you to come back if your opponent does go first. And it was a spot where I know in this game, based on how our terrain is set up, based on how the fact that this is the one we both have like 2 giant pieces that are open first floors with like windows and everything. So it's like anything that's standing in them, especially like my infantry, are just gonna die. But what Liam was saying afterwards, that something I should have done with my terrain is they had like this little like nub on them, that I should have taken it. Instead of putting the nub back towards my side, I needed to make sure that the side towards my board edge was flat, so I had the maximum amount of space to deny firing lines with it. And you'll see why this matters, because on turn 1, or for the pregame roll, Steve ends up rolling to go first. And of course, because I take Master Tactician, I have the 3 redeploys, I can put things into Strategic Reserve. I, again, pick up all 3 of my Leman Russes and put them in Strategic Reserve, which is terrible. It sucks really badly because it means that if I have to put them to Strategic Reserve, they're effectively dead for the entire first battle round, right? They're not doing anything, they're not soaking fire, but I made a similar mistake going up against Killian's Chaos Knights at There Is Only War, where I thought that I could leave a couple of them on the board, but I also know that Imperial Knights will absolutely pick up two Leman Russes in a turn if I leave them out in the open. The only thing that I was comfortable leaving on the board was the Rogel Dorn, primarily because in the position where it was kind of like kitty corner, like opposite corners with most of the or all the autocannon Helverins or autocannon Armiger Helverins. You guys know what I'm talking about. So it was not going to be just peppered with fire. It was actually mostly pretty safe from fire. But the thing that was super, super tragic and the thing that was super, super important was even with my best attempts to try and hide my Kazarkin in places where they were not going to get shot, um, kind of like what happened with what was his name with Wyatt at There Is Only War. Steve almost to a man killed my Barbikinski Kazarkin. And what ended up being left was only 2 Meltaguns. The entire rest of the squad ended up getting wiped between the morale phase and just getting shot. The Rogel Dorn was put on the middle bracket as well. And then the rest of the fire was like not super devastating, but the thing about Tides of Conviction is so much of it, in my experience, comes down to how much map control you can take. Can you take everything that you couldn't hide and put it in places where they are hidden on your first turn? So that the counter swing on your opponent's second turn is nowhere near as devastating. And I couldn't get a lot of things in hidden positions. And so my turn 1, I jump my other unit of Kazarkin, which is mostly intact. I think it lost like 1 guy on the first turn, but I jumped them over the wall, and I do end up picking up 2 armatures. And on the flip side, I take my Rogel Dorn and put all of its fire into the one target on his home objective because I actually can draw a line of sight to it. And remember, on Tides of Conviction, if you don't control your home objective, you only get your CP on a 4-up. And as I take the shots, I do end up killing the armature that is holding that objective, but he has enough that he's able to go back and it starts getting all of his CP back on by turn 3. But the big thing that ends up happening is as I try and take a bunch of these different spots, it's actually kind of funny, right? Like in most matchups, mortars are actually reasonably useful to like shoot and like do a bunch of chip damage, but against knights, they're really bad. Like mortars just do so little because they're hitting on if they're indirecting, they're hitting on 4s, wounding on 5s at AP 0s, right? So like all these knights are not taking a whole lot of damage and realistically are going to be making most of their saves. So in order to make them useful, you actually have to like frontline them. You have to use them as screens. And so that's what I was doing with the mortars. I put them out in front so that they are direct firing, meaning that they don't have the -1 ballistic skill, so they're hitting on 3s. They're still wounding on 5s, but at least they don't have the +1 to the save to cancel out the extra AP from take aim. So I made the mortars like a little bit useful, but because of that, as we're doing all these different things, as I bring the tanks on, I know it's like okay, the 2 knights that are controlling the western side of the board, which is very open. There was not a ton of terrain over on that side. Um, as we did all of our shooting, I brought all of my tanks in on turn 2, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to clear as much of the eastern board as I can. And as they come in, they do pick up 2 armatures, but the crucial one is Steve had a Warglaive, the one with the Melta and sword, coming in from, or had come in, and as my Leman Russ comes in from Strategic Reserve to try and shoot it, um, I take its multi-Meltas, and there's 4 shots. and I actually had 3 of them. And the Armiger was sitting on 5 wounds left at this point, after shooting with the plasma, shooting with the Lascannon, and some other fire that had come through. And I'm thinking, okay, awesome. If I get lucky and, and get 1 of these through, I can kill it. If I get 2 of these through, um, I'm very likely to kill it just based on rolling the 2d6 damage, or the 2d6 plus 2 each, or d6 plus 2 for each shot. And I take the rolls, and I roll 3 1s for the damage. And I'm like, okay, I really need this Armiger dead. Otherwise, it's going to get in. It's going to pop a Melta into the tank. It's going to run up and use a strike, and the tank is very likely dead if I don't fully bracket it, or if I don't kill it right here. I spend a CP to re-roll it. I roll a 4th 1 in a row. And so suddenly, my tank that I'm so confident would be able to run in and actually kill this Armiger is going to it's going to die on the next turn. I'm like, oh no. I put it in a spot where its Vengeful Salute won't be able to shoot anything effectively on its next turn, or when he actually charges in, unless he kills it with his shooting, which is very unlikely. And so he ends up keeping that Armiger alive, and I effectively concede on turn 4 because I just don't have anything left. I've brought in a couple of regular guys to try and shoot at things, to try and do little bits of damage here and there, and try and score me a couple of extra boots on the ground points because I've already maxed out Inflexible Command. But I know at this point, it's like, I am never going to score more primary points just because I need to control 2, control 3, and because he's gotten Virtuous, all of his guys count as a crap ton of OBSEC models on any objective that they're on. I'm never going to take any of these back. So I end up conceding that one on turn 4 effectively. We talk out the rest of it. And Steve ends up beating me for his first time ever in a tournament bracket, 77 to 53. Almost immediately after he beats me, he gets this distraught look on his face. And I'm like, what's going on? He's like, was I the one who's making sure that you can't possibly hit top 100? I'm like, I think so, yeah. He looks so sad for just a moment. But I told him, and I still feel this way, even in the moment. Like I was not super enthused because like I knew kind of from the outset, like I I probably have lost this game, like straight up. Even after he just gets first turn. But I told him, it's like, that's how the game goes, right? That's why we're playing a dice game, and I would always rather have earned the top 100 than just having it given to you. Like, if you really wanted me to do it, you could have conceded and giving me 100-0, but I wouldn't want that. I would rather just get the game through. And so, for anybody who's coming back in to this, for just a quick summary, this has been my worst event thus far. I ended up going 1 win and 2 losses. I lost to Tomas's Iron Hands in game 1, 64 to 97. I beat Kyle's Chaos Knights in game 2, 89 to 84. And then I lost to one of my really good friends, Steve's Imperial Knights, in his first time ever taking a game off of me, 53 to 77. Meaning that overall I ended up going 9th out of 12 at this event, and that is not my proudest event that I've ever had, but it is what it was. And so with that, let's do a quick check-in for the top 100. Guys, it is not possible at this point for me to crack top 100. This last event is going to get me effectively 0 points because they only take your best 6 events, and I already have 6 events in, and my worst event currently has a score of like 90.54. And so, right now, as of the time of this recording, I am currently sitting at rank 251 with a total score of 730.47. I took a look at the current rank 100, which is what I would need to do better than. The current rank 100 has 904.03 points for a difference of 173.56. Now, with that in mind, my next event, if I wanted to crack top 100, I would need to score 264.1 points because I need to not only score better than my worst event, I need to score a difference of 173.56. Now, for context, I did look this up before. The current rank 1 on the ITC ladder, his name is Manny Chima, and he is a player over in the UK. And he has won a bunch of events. Basically, every GT, I'm taking a look right now, he's gotten first, second, first, second, fourth. Okay? His best event, the most points that he's gotten, is 261.31 at the Manchester Super Major, which had, let me double check how many players that had. That had, oh, 258 players. The last event that I'm probably going to in this ITC season is going to be the next event, the Riverside Classic, which as of right now has only 32 players currently registered. So if you're watching and you're not registered for it and you are free this coming weekend, make sure you actually sign up for that one and it'll be a good time. But it is not possible. The winner of this event will probably be getting somewhere around the neighborhood of 200 points, which is 64 points short of what I need. So unfortunately, we are not going to find our way into the top 100 for this ITC season. We're not going to scratch it. But hopefully, I believe the highest that I touched, the highest that I scratched was rank 192, which for my first competitive season, I think has been pretty good. If I have a good time, if I go 4-1 or undefeated, I can probably get to about 130, 150, somewhere in there, which I would be pretty happy with considering what else has happened so far. But with that, that is everything that has happened. Thanks again to everybody who has been watching so far over the past couple of weeks. Is we finish up with Joshi's Journey episode 6 into 40K. We will have another video coming out for you guys next week, which might be the last one in the series, as we will be talking about the Riverside Classic Grand Tournament hosted by the Xenos Petting Zoo. And so everybody who has been watching so far, please make sure like, comment, subscribe. And again, thank you to that one guy who I met at the Odyssey RTT who said, I'm looking forward to the next video. It's really powered through and helped me get this one out. So for now, we'll see you guys all next week.